Hey everyone, it's Christian Lasval. We are back on the floor here of the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and joining me right now is a good friend of mine, Landon Starbuck. She is the president and founder of Freedom Forever. Landon, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
I'm so glad to be here with you, Christian.
And Freedom Forever is actually a new project of yours, and so we could start right away by having you tell us, what is Freedom Forever? Tell us about it.
Absolutely. So it's my new nonprofit. It's combating child trafficking and exploitation in America. I realized in my work over 10 years advocating for children and fighting sex trafficking that there's just a need for these more controversial, sensitive areas like, the pro-pedophile agenda, the radical sex ed in schools, the issues at the border, those sensitive issues nobody wants to touch. I realized there's such a need for activism. And so I formed an activism prevention-based organization so that real people can actually take action to combat these issues.
And what are some of the ways that people are going to be able to take action through an organization like Freedom Forever, which will take us to another action step that you hosted earlier this year, or I guess technically last year now. But what are some of those action steps that people would be able to participate in through Freedom Forever?
Right. So we're mission oriented. So like I said, activism based. So one of the things that we did was march to the border. It was the largest coalition march at the border to demonstrate and draw awareness to the human trafficking, the epidemic levels of human trafficking at the border. We're talking over 200,000 unaccompanied minors that have been brought over. And then we also have, a third of them that are missing. This administration has lost track of a third of them. We put in things like FOIA requests to demand accountability and transparency of where these children are, why this continues happening, and putting pressure on politicians to act. Thankfully we have candidates like Carrie Lake that I feel very strongly will take action on the border. So that's one of our missions. We do many different missions to help get the porn out of schools, all of the grooming materials, what's happening to our kids. They're being indoctrinated and sexualized. So these are things that we all have to get involved with now, or it's going to get out of control.
You mentioned that this administration has lost track of some of the children. Tell us about that. What does that mean exactly for those who don't understand what the process looks like at the border when unaccompanied minors are coming across or are being brought by people who claim to be their parents?
That's right. So many people don't realize, an unaccompanied minor, that's a child who's already been exploited, because leaving a child in the middle of a desert where 70% of the girls are raped, that is already exploitation, and is being driven and incentivized by this reckless, leftist rhetoric of this open border failed policies. So you have this abundance of children coming over, and they're being put into these shadowy situations with no transparency and oversight. And a lot of them are sick, a lot of them are being sexually abused, and the reporting is being kept, very discreet. So those numbers are not being released, because if there is, then the narrative suddenly changes, right? And people like you and I be reporting on it. So that work has to be done, because this Biden administration is hiding those numbers. I don't know if y'all remember when Senator Ted Cruz, he was asking Mayorkas about, hey, how many kids have been trafficked?
And he
they just
conveniently didn't have them.
Right, they couldn't find those numbers conveniently. So this is the work that has to be done. It's activists like you and I that have to get involved now, because the government's not going to do it. Nobody else is going to touch the subject.
Yeah, and actually we have an example of one of the children who you've been advocating for that is currently missing, correct?
Yes.
Tell us
So we
about
have
this.
evidence that this little girl was trafficked across our southern border. Sadly, her mom died looking for her. And so this is just one child of so many stories that are just absolutely heartbreaking. This could have been prevented. And children like this need a voice. They need advocates. They need strong people that are willing to stand up and support policies that are going to make this end. Because children like this should never be brought across our open borders and exploited and trafficked. And many people don't realize that these children are sold for thousands of dollars a day, used as pawns by the cartel. And this has to stop. We have to stop this pipeline of trafficking and have accountability.
Yeah, and what people need to understand too is an open border helps to fuel this sort of thing. So when it comes to policy issues like having an open border versus a secure one, there are real consequences to this. There's the narrative that the left sells that's overly simplistic, that we just want to open the border so that we can accommodate anyone and everyone. But it may sound nice, but the practical implications and applications of something like that are actually destructive for a multitude of reasons, among which most seriously are the exploitation of young children like this girl right here who we have before us, and how many countless others, as you said, that we don't even have a trace of, never even know their names, have no way of finding out, and sometimes you even find them dead coming across the border. Now, on the topic of exploiting children, I know you're a big advocate about this as well. We have some of that, a lot of that going on in our education system here in the United States. Most recently, Florida has taken, they just seem to be leading the right way on just about everything with Governor DeSantis right now, and their legislature, thank God. They passed a bill that has been dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill, even though, as DeSantis called a reporter out the other day, there's no mention of that in the legislation at all. It's the Florida Parental Rights, or Parental Rights in Education bill, I believe is the technical term. How important is it, and what are you seeing now that conservatives need to be doing and parents need to be stepping up to do to protect their children in the education system, which historically we have thought was a safe place to send our kids, but especially in the COVID, post-COVID era, at least until the midterms are over, we know now that these have been breeding grounds for sexual exploitation, graphic content, and indoctrination of ideologies that we don't want our kids being taught.
That's right. I mean, it's sexual grooming ground. It's not just indoctrination in radical political ideology. It's grooming ground to groom our children. And the other thing that, you know, is an interesting aspect is like the attack on identity, right? So we're destabilizing children's identity. We're hijacking the home values that they're being brought with, and they come to school and they're given these superficial identity education and indoctrination instruction. And what that does is it renders them more vulnerable to exploitation because they're not being taught actual real values or anything that is knowledge-based or anything like that, particularly in sex ed. The radical sex ed is actively sexualizing them, encouraging them to partake in high-risk sexual behaviors, normalizing that, including porn, where, you know, there's no way to verify age and consent. It's an entire exploitation industry, as we know with Pornhub and the trafficking on those platforms. So what they're doing is just so reckless, irresponsible. And we have over 29.3 million reports of sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, sextortion to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Now, you mentioned there pornography as well. That's something that has kind of been a more popular topic to discuss in recent days, in recent years, I guess you could say, with some people, even on the right, saying that that's not something that should be regulated, not something that counts as trafficking. Are they right in that assessment?
No, because porn is not free speech, okay? Porn is exploitive in nature, meaning that there is no way to verify age and consent. So porn is prostitution on camera. And if we're against prostitution, we should be against porn because there's no difference. It's an actor being paid, right? And you can't verify if that actor is actually consenting and not being, you know, coerced or forced into this industry, as so many of them are. And so we have to take a hard stance. And again, the porn of today, the active algorithms are debasing violent porn and incest simulation and rape simulation. So we're talking about not a porn category. We're talking about crime, normalizing crime simulation. And so that is the part of the conversation that's entirely missing. You know, free speech can still exist. If there's a way to truly verify age and consent, it should exist in the ethers of the internet that are inaccessible, and you have to upload and verify your own identification, because the existence of this in public spaces are what is so dangerous for children. And we have a proliferation of pedophilia because of this issue.
Absolutely. And your final thoughts here, you're a mom. Your advice to moms right now who are maybe facing their school board or have learned about some sort of perverted curriculum in their children's schools, or maybe it's parents who live in these border towns in the United States that have this massive influx of illegal immigration coming in that, again, have negative consequences that open border people don't want to talk about. They only want to talk about the possibility that we could accommodate anyone and everyone here in the United States. What's your advice to those moms in navigating some of those challenges in those areas?
Yeah, well, the number one thing that I think every parent needs to know, the number one way to protect your child against online sexual exploitation and trafficking and sextortion is to not allow kids on social media. It is not a place for kids. It's an adult place. And until people say, well, what is the right age, right? What is the right age to allow your kid on or teen on these platforms? I say, well, what age do they have the digital self-defense skills to navigate a world of porn, drugs, sex, exploitation? Because if your kid isn't old enough to drive and to be trusted to drive a car, you know, why are we walking them into this world when they're ill-equipped to navigate it? You know, it's sending our children, it's setting them up for failure. And there's so many ways to engage in tech. I have a 9-year-old that builds websites and edits video. They can engage in tech in a healthy way that doesn't, you know, put so many risks on them. So there's a way to do that. And, you know, at the border, and in schools, parents have to get involved in this issue. Like I said, nobody's coming to save the day. There's no government. There's no great big organization that's going to come in and start helping. And so it's really on us as parents to step up and demand our control back. We have to fight for parental rights because there's a very big assault coming from the left to take away parental rights and a radical sexual rights education initiative that is happening with kids. So, we have to fight for that or we will lose, the right to protect our children.
Absolutely. Virtual school has exposed the plans that were underway by the left to indoctrinate our children and raise up a generation that goes contrary to all of the values that have been historically American and values that are good, and instead replace them with perverted, sexualized values of secular humanism. And if we aren't teaching our children how to properly engage with these issues, the people who are pushing the alternative will make sure that they engage those issues with your children, whether you like it or not. So you're absolutely right. Where can people
100%.
Find you and learn more about Freedom Forever?
Yes, absolutely. freedomforever.us. That is our prevention activism hub. We want you to get involved. So sign up and help us with legislative efforts, all sorts of local-based activism. And then I'm Landon Starbuck on Instagram, Twitter, True Social.
Yes.
Come find me.
There you have it. Landon Starbuck, president and founder of Freedom Forever. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure.